Hey, my name's Michael, pastor at North Village Church, married 20 plus years, and just wanted to give some encouragement on marriage. So we've been talking about husbands, wives, and right now just touch on communication and conflict. Now, it is common for married couples to, we don't have fights, we don't have conflict, but the reality is you want conflict. If you don't have conflict, that means somebody's kind of always getting their way, somebody's getting walked over, and what you want is you want both husband and wife investing in the marriage. So let's look at our passage in James. It says, "What is the source of quarrels and conflicts among you? Is not the source your pleasures that wage war in your members? You lust and do not have, so you commit murder. You are envious and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel." Let's be honest and admit that we have desires. Every human being has expectations, and when those expectations, when those desires are not met, it's going to lead to quarrels. It's going to lead to fights, and they can be as petty as how you load the dishwasher, or how many times socks are left out, or who didn't follow through on what they said they were going to do, and boom, right there, there's frustration. That's okay. The temptation is to not talk about it, and we want to talk about those frustrations, because if you sweep that frustration under the rug and just act like it didn't happen, and ignore the frustration, it's going to create like a wedge. And one time is not going to be that big of a deal, but you're a human being, so it's going to happen more than once. And when that wedge is left unattended, there's going to be a breakdown in intimacy. And when there's a breakdown in intimacy, there's going to be a breakdown in the marriage. And so really what we want to do is we want to resolve the conflict. We want to resolve that frustration. So let me just give you some just quick observations on what that looks like practically. Well, the first observation to help you fight clean is really going to come down to assertive speaking and active listening. I know you're thinking, really? That's what's going to make a difference? Yeah. I mean, sometimes when my wife and I, when we're just missing, we want to communicate, and when we are just missing each other, 20 years in, we still were like, all right. So assertive speaking is just clearly identifying, I want X, and when X doesn't happen, I feel like Y, right? Fill in the blank. And then active listening is your spouse, your husband or wife, saying, I heard you say that you want X, and that when X doesn't happen, it feels like Y. Is that correct? Right? And I get it. There's a part in you right now saying, really? Do we have to communicate at that level? Sometimes. I mean, not all the time. But sometimes you're just missing each other, and you don't want to continue to do damage in your conflict. The second one is that clean and clear communication is going to lead to intimacy. It takes effort, and I get it. As a spouse, you're going to say to yourself, well, I don't want to go through these steps. I want my spouse just to get me, right? You ever had that thought? Like, wow, why don't they just get me? Why don't they know me, right? You know why? Because they're not Jesus. It's only Jesus who is going to get you, that understands our groaning, that's too deep for words, right? It's only Jesus who gets us. Everybody else, spouse included, is going to take some effort in communicating, resolving conflict, and when we do, it's going to lead to intimacy. Hey, the third one is simply that the gospel changes our communication, right? The gospel changes our conflict. Here's what's going to happen in every conflict is you're going to miss each other, you're going to get frustrated, and then we are going to internally start thinking of ways to defend ourselves. That right there is already going to create dissonance, because we're not listening to our spouse, we're thinking of ways to justify ourselves, to say that we are innocent and that we didn't do anything wrong. We like to point the finger, right? But what the gospel does, the gospel changes everything, because in the gospel, we admit, oh yeah, I I did a lot wrong, right? That I have sinned in more ways than we can imagine, and I absolutely uh, make this relationship complicated. That my sin gets in ways that I could never fully see or understand. And the good news is that Jesus has come. He knows about that sin. He's taken that sin upon himself at the cross. He's put it to death and conquered it in the resurrection, so that there's hope in our communication. So when you're in conflict, when you're struggling to understand each other, to resolve that conflict, just to remember the gospel that, yeah, man, I'm a sinner, and Jesus knows that, and He's forgiven me, and so I could fully admit that to my spouse, and my spouse can admit that to me, and that both of us, in the midst of our conflict, can see it as a means of grace, really, to remind us that we need Jesus. And let me just give you a quick charge to the husband, right? That spiritual leader, moving the conversation towards conflict, uh, fighting clean, communicating well. That's spiritually leading. It's simply saying, like, hey, can we talk about what happened? Everything in you is not going to want to do that. Everything in you is going to say, dude, don't rock the boat. We're getting along. Why bring that up? She hasn't mentioned it. No, it's there. Um, Keep short accounts with each other and be the spiritual leader that says, hey, can we talk about that? Wives, man, be that complimentary helper. If you see your husband even getting close to trying to initiate that conflict resolution, fan that flame, encourage him, meet him halfway, and say, yeah, we need to. I see where you're going. Come on, let's get on board with that. Like, absolutely, both spouses can bring it up, but just generally, husbands, man, take the responsibility to lead towards resolution. Wives, complement any kind of movement in that direction. Overall, you're wanting to hold on to the fact that Jesus has brought this man and this woman together in marriage. So when there's conflict, there's going to be a temptation to go tell other people, go tell mom, go tell friend. Sometimes get our best energy will be in our frustrations being expressed to other people. But really, man, we want to save that for Jesus. We want to save that for our spouse. And so we're creating like a safe place in our marriage that is, as spouses, we're not going to run each other down to our friends and family, that we're going to communicate to each other. We're going to believe the best about each other. Like, more than likely, neither spouse woke up, that morning trying to frustrate the other one, but it happens. And so we're going to believe we're for each other, and that no matter what frustrations might come up, and no matter how much we might fumble through resolving that conflict, that we're committed to Jesus, we're committed to one another, and that's never going to change. And that is going to make a big difference in your marriage. So take advantage of that opportunity. It's possible there's something right now that you've been thinking of. There's some pain, there's some hurt, there's a tone, there's a word, there's a comment, right? And go talk to your spouse about that. It's an opportunity to remember the gospel, opportunity to receive the forgiveness that you've been granted in Christ. Man, gather with your spouse, lift it up to Him, and taste of the beautiful gift of marriage. Next time, I think we're getting into family and in-laws, and how to navigate those conversations. So looking forward to it.